This is a People First Radio podcast.
From the cold refrigerator mother of the 1950s to the more recent warrior mother, there are a number of stereotypes, archetypes, and narratives surrounding moms and autism. Patty Douglas explores them in the book Unmothering Autism.
I am Dr. Patty Douglas. I'm an associate professor at Queen's University in the Faculty of Education and the chair in student success and wellness there as well. And I am both a neurodivergent individual as well as a mom of two neurodivergent sons, one of whom attracted the label of autism.
And you have written a book that is called Unmothering Autism. Maybe the place to start is, how do you define or how do you think of autism? You say there, a son who had attracted the label of autism. What do you think people need to know about that idea?
Autism was never in our lexicon before about the 1940s, late 1940s. It had appeared within other diagnoses like schizophrenia, but it wasn't a thing. There's always been folks who now fit the description of autism, but autism is a made-up category just as much as it is a very real lived experience. And so I use that language, which actually comes from my colleague and dear friend, Catherine Runswick-Cole, to kind of signal that, I don't, and we don't in our family, place a final word on that word autism. So autism and our understanding of autism and what is autistic is always emerging. And it could become something else. And the other reason is that when I was a mom, so it's my older son who attracted that label, and he was little, I thought my only thoughts were that he was beautiful. He used to line up cars every day. He used to know every single car in that lineup had to happen every day, in addition to all sorts of other things that other kids weren't doing. But I wasn't worried. I wasn't fussed. It was really when he entered the school system that he started to be flagged and that these labels started to be put on him. And it, in some ways, is a deficit label. It tells you there's something wrong with you. At the same time that it's an identity that I absolutely support and I absolutely honor. So using that language just problematizes the category a little bit. So, it's not a finished thing. We're always learning about being human. And I think for me, especially now with the work I do in collaboration with different Indigenous communities around the world, this is also a colonialist term. It's not, it's a medicalized colonialist term that can describe something, but it doesn't describe the whole of human experience. So I just want to put a little flag around that term.
You have explored the ways that motherhood and autism have been tied up historically, continue to be tied up. What are the Coles notes, if you will, about that idea?
Mothers have always been blamed for when things go wrong, and sometimes given praise when things go right. So, and again, scare quotes around wrong. I've come to understand autism, or what we call autism, as another way of being human. And there's no blame. There's no blame in that. It's the diversity of being human. So mothers have always been blamed for autism, along with all sorts of disabilities. Mothers are tasked with reproducing sort of a workforce that's going to build nations. And when that doesn't happen, when we have a child who has any kind of disability label, the fault is primarily given to mothers. So with autism, the first mother that came along were refrigerator mothers. So that was the idea that you were an inherently cold person. Even if you appeared warm, you had something disordered in your ability or mechanism of love, to the point, Bruno Bettelheim talked about very subtle kind of reactions when you're breastfeeding a child could, unfold into rejection, and that child, initiated an autistic withdrawal in that child. So kind of a psychoanalytic understanding. And then about when a biomedical understanding of autism became more prominent during the 1960s, 70s, 80s, then all of a sudden mothers were to be sort of the hero therapist. So therapies like applied behavior analysis and others being taught to mothers coming into the home, and we were now to be therapists for our children and to normalize them in that sense. And so part of our history as a family was having a behavioral consultant come into our home and, teach us what to do. And so we all took part in this behavioral therapy. And, my kids still laugh about it, and we laugh about it as a family, because it's like, yeah, remember those behavior charts we all had to do? Like, what was that? Like, you're observed, you're scrutinized, and you kind of live in these parallel tracks of, you're supposed to be doing one thing. And I was always the mom that would, you were supposed to be learning this therapizing, like this therapy technique, in order to get any service at all at the time. And I didn't have time. I wanted to spend time with my children and enjoy my children. And so I was always the mom showing up late or not having done her homework and getting threatened to get kicked out of the services because I wasn't complying enough. And yeah, anyway, that was the hero therapist. And if your child started to look quote unquote normal, then you were doing well. But if they didn't, then you were blamed for that too, and threatened in terms of losing services, the little services that there were at the time. And then, the most recent sort of iteration of that mother is like the warrior mother. And that's kind of an intensification of that hero therapist kind of mother. So she is now supposed to watch everything from, now we have sort of genomics and epigenetics saying that if I eat the wrong thing or think the wrong thing or live in the wrong place or do anything, have trauma, that's all going to pass down. And I'm going to cause autism, not just in my child, but like in my grandchild now and in my great grandchild. So, she, like, that figure of the warrior mother is also really interesting in some ways, because there's a lot of pushback against medical systems too. So it's complex, but we never get a break, which is why I wanted to kind of de-link, the mother part from, the loving and the care and the relationship that you have with your kid.
To that end, in your book, whenever you wrote the word mother, you had the M in brackets. M, other. Can you explain what you were doing there?
Yes. Retaining the word mother, mother is gendered. So it's still women who occupy that role for the most part worldwide, or femme-identified folks. So I didn't want to say caregiver or carer and kind of erase the gender. So retaining the word mother, but I also wanted to complicate the notion that it's something inherent or essential to you as a woman. Just because you're born a woman, you're going to be nurturing, you're going to kind of be a certain way. So keeping that bracket there does both. It retains the word mother, but it also starts to point to that our idea of what a mother is highly problematic. So not only is it essentialized and reduced to kind of, biology, but it's all, and that, if you don't naturally parent in a certain way, then there's something wrong with you. But it's also very isolating and fracturing and individualizing. So part of what I argue in the book is for kind of a more collective understanding of mothering by the end of the book. And it's a critique also of a highly individualistic, kind of Euro-Western, neoliberal, to use a lot of big words all in a row, sort of society, and I'm looking in particular at North America, where we're supposed to be hyper individualized and do everything ourselves. And so putting that bracket really opens the possibilities for anyone to mother, first of all, also honors gender, and also honors a more collectivized or collaborative form of mothering.
You shared that there has been this idea out there that there are people essentially seeking to cure the autism of their child, and there are other groups out there who say the whole idea that you could cure autism is deeply, deeply problematic. Could you tell me about that?
Yes. So it's a larger question of almost a hatred for difference in our current society. So you can see it in our current day rhetoric, like the current day rhetoric coming out of the United States again, where tragedy is wrapped around, like I think it was Kennedy who was talking about these kids will never have jobs, these kids will never get married, these kids, like referring to autistic kids. So there is like an imperative, so almost like a push, a cultural push that does come from biomedicine, but not only biomedicine, to cure difference, like to fix it, to change it, to improve it, in order for people to fall into line and kind of assimilate into society such as it is. We don't really know what to do with difference. You can see how, like, people are getting expelled from the United States right now for all different reasons. Like, it's playing out in these graphic ways. So it's not unrelated to other kinds of difference that we don't, and when I say we, it's really like the dominant white sort of middle class, Euro-Western, global North ethos. So that curative impulse comes from a larger cultural context in which, we don't as a society know how to embrace difference and live with difference. So there are, what get called the autism, like I was interviewed for an article once in Toronto Life called The Autism Wars, where on the one side, there's a real push for something curative, and on the other, there's a push, and I tend to be on that other side, a real push for acceptance and affirming approaches and different pathways through life, and revaluing what we think about human difference. We don't all have to be just one thing. The hyper-productive worker and the reproducing mother who is also supposed to be a hyper-productive worker. So that's kind of the scene. I think that, like, one tragedy that really, I think, happens is that for families who have autistic kids, especially autistic kids who have many complex kinds of things going on. So as you know, autism is a label that's given to all sorts of people, and it gets called sort of from high to low functioning. So I tend to stay, like, you'll be guessing this by now with me, like, I tend to stay away from that medicalized language. But there might be kids who aren't speaking, or who are self-injuring, or other kinds of other complex layered factors. And when those families are told the only hope for your child is intensive normalizing therapy to teach them skills, or the only hope is in genetic research, and there's no mentors, there's no autistic role models, there are, but they're not presented to those families. I can appreciate that you might be pushing for a cure instead of, that's kind of, I think, where some of that, what gets called the autism wars, comes from, are those different experiences. One thing I've noticed in my work when I talk with mothers is that they might begin feeling like they want to solve it. I certainly did. That was my impulse. We all sort of have the that sort of cultural imperative. Like there's a disability studies scholar, Rod McCalco, who talks about the biomedical imperative to cure or fix. And another scholar in critical autism studies, Remy Yurgo, who also talks about this an exigency to kind of fix what's different and make it fall into line. So, I think we all share that impulse and often share that impulse at the beginning, but quickly realize that our loved ones are the way they are. It just is. And so that actually opens up a very different pathway. How do I help support the best possible life, walking alongside this person, rather than how do I eliminate this from the face of the earth? And, it's eugenic in a way, right? Like, I don't know if you know sort of the eugenics movement, but it's saying that a certain kind of person shouldn't exist when we put all of our efforts into a cure, which I think, we lose something in losing human diversity. So for me, I want to ask, how can we best support, even very complex needs? How do we best support that as a society rather than put all of these millions and millions of dollars into eliminating certain kinds of people?
You address this in your book, which is all about autism mothers. What has been historically the role or the place of autism fathers?
I think it's variable. I do address it a little bit. It was interesting because one of the editors said, where what about autism fathers? So fathers, first of all, get off easy, like in terms of being blamed. So they have their own journey, and there are actually some beautiful sort of memoirs that fathers have written about their own journey coming to terms with, themselves and their child. Fathers tend to take a different relationship to it. So, mothers try to understand sort of our journey alongside our loved one. I think fathers maybe in some ways try to understand what it means for themselves more. I'm not sure, but they're there. I think it's a little bit of a myth. Like, I do bust the myth a little bit that fathers just immediately abscond. That's actually not the case. Lots of them are there caring. Some of them are in the what I call the mothering role with the brackets around the but they, fathers don't get the same kind of blame as mothers do. It just isn't a sort of sociocultural phenomenon that we're going to blame fathers for autism. So you can see that even in the rhetoric now coming out of the States, that, one of the tragically false myths being propagated is that Tylenol causes autism. So if, again, going to like the mother's actions during pregnancy in order to try to pinpoint the cause and the cure. So like, it just doesn't happen with biological or other fathers who are involved, the blame at that sort of social level. Yeah.
What do you see as the future of the kind of the neurodiversity movement more broadly, and how it impacts the issues that you've been focusing on in your work?
Yeah. So the neurodiversity movement was started by autistic self-advocates, and it was sort of this collectively started movement. And I think it has great promise. We've got all sorts of rights that have been, fought for and won, as well as different scholarly movements. So, critical neurodiversity studies is now a new thing that's emerged through Robert Chapman and his group in the UK, critical autism studies through sort of Nick Walker and Remy Yurgo and others. So there's a ton of potential in saying that diversity in the way our bodies and minds work is normal, just like biodiversity. And, we need to shift the way in which we understand and, practice in health and education and other arenas, the way in which we understand the full range of diversity and human diversity. So I think that that's a really strong positive. There are concepts like neuroqueering, which are really cool that say, there's no normal human being. There's no normal way to develop. And we need to be constantly questioning that because our world wants to settle into a really normative understanding of being human. So those are all really exciting and strong and positive things. And I've done writing in the area with colleagues like Margaret Gibson and others. I also have hesitations. So one is that it can essentialize. So when I say that, and it kind of can reduce a person. So when I say essentialize, I mean, drawing a straight line between kind of brains and world. So that can kind of evacuate or take away the social context in a problematic way where you can, and essentializing has been used to say, oh, well, mothers are only good for, having babies, or Black people are XYZ, right? Or whatever. So it's like kind of finding a cause in biology for a very complex socio-cultural phenomenon. So it does have that risk, as well as there's kind of this phenomenon happening around neurodiversity light, which, is kind of losing its connection to really critical self-advocacy kinds of actions and thinking. And everybody gets really excited about it, which is really wonderful, but nothing changes. So, some folks are like I see lots of businesses, lots of school districts, lots of, just schools, whatever, taking up the language of neurodiversity without really changing understandings or practices. So that's another danger. Neurodiversity is also not new. So the more I work alongside Indigenous communities, it's that this kind of diversity has been recognized and known and valued in many Indigenous communities. And I don't want to homogenize Indigenous community at all. So, but, in the Maori communities I'm working with, in the, different sort of Indigenous organizations that I'm working with. So it's not new. So it gets kind of taken up as new. And it's kind of new old, I guess, as Carla Rice might say.
Is there anything else you think it's important to share with people about your work?
I would like to share that the most important voices to me, even though I write about mothering, are autistic self-advocates and those who are, leading sort of research and scholarship. So that's one thing. The other thing is that the journey of parents, and particularly those in mother roles, needs to also be heard. So those are parallel sites of really important knowledge that needs to be lifted up. That's another tension that can often happen where self-advocates don't really want to hear from parents and mothers, and understandably, but I just appreciate this opportunity to talk about the book and to kind of elevate both. So maybe I'll just end there.
Patty Douglas, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Thanks so much for having me. It was lovely to meet you.
Patty Douglas is author of the book Unmothering Autism.
People First Radio, People First Media, and People First Stories are community media projects of Vancouver Island Mental Health Society and are produced in Nanaimo, British Columbia. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of Vancouver Island Mental Health Society or its broadcast, podcast, and social media partners.